During Thanksgiving dinner, my mother laughed and called me a dreamer who would never amount to anything, and she did it with a mouth full of turkey and an audience that nodded along. The table went quiet for half a second, just long enough for the insult to land. Then the clink of cutlery resumed, like nothing important had happened. I stared at the gravy boat, watching steam curl upward, feeling that familiar burn behind my eyes I'd learned not to show. My aunt smirked. My cousin avoided my gaze. This wasn't new, it was tradition. I had just come from the front door when she said it. My coat was still on. My phone was still warm in my hand. Outside, a black car idled at the curb, engine humming softly, patiently. Then the doorbell rang. When their CEO stepped inside, immaculate, composed, my mother rose instinctively. She looked at me again, really looked this time. Her smile collapsed into confusion as the woman turned to me and said, with careful respect, "Ma'am, I didn't know you were her daughter." I had spent 29 Thanksgivings at that table, invisible except when someone needed a serving spoon or a punching bag. My mother was sharp-tongued, brilliant in her own right, and terrifyingly proud, but only of the accomplishments she approved of. I was the quiet shadow who read while they argued politics, the daughter whose college degree was nice but never enough. I grew up learning to smile through dismissal. Teachers assumed I struggled until I solved problems too complex for the lesson plan. Classmates overlooked me until I presented a project that left them scrambling for words. I learned patience and precision, not as virtues but as survival tools. Jobs came and went, each offer a test of how far I could rise before someone's disbelief hit like gravity. Friends sometimes whispered encouragement. Most kept their distance, afraid my calm resolve meant I would outlast them quietly. Every insult, every smirk, every patronizing laugh had become a ledger I carried. I didn't rage, I noted, I planned, I waited. My life was invisible armor, silent but unbreakable, worn under the gaze of a family that never truly saw me. The black car at the curb wasn't luck. It was a reckoning. I watched my mother carve the turkey with exaggerated precision, her eyes darting to me like a hawk measuring prey. Each motion carried the weight of disdain I had felt for decades. "Careful, you'll spill that on the carpet," she said, not at me, but at my plate, her tone sharp and clipped. I swallowed, keeping my hands folded in my lap, letting the slight slide past like water over stone. My father smirked at her comment, raising his glass in silent agreement, while my cousin nudged his chair closer, eager for the performance. Every glance, every pause felt choreographed to remind me of my place. I noticed the subtle shifts, the way they leaned toward each other, the soft chuckle that cut me out of the circle, the unspoken hierarchy they reinforced without a word. Even my aunt, normally warm, offered a bless your heart that tasted like sugar-coated dismissal. My napkin trembled in my hands, not from anger but from years of cataloging every slight, every microgesture that said, without saying, "You will never belong here." Then the doorbell rang, slicing through the familiar drone of sarcasm. I could feel the air shift, tiny hairs on the back of my neck rising, and I smiled slightly, just enough to signal that the ledger was about to be balanced. The moment the CEO stepped inside, I felt it. A quiet pivot, a subtle shift in gravity. My mother's laugh still lingered in the air, sharp and unearned, but it no longer carried power over me. I realized then that all those years of cataloging slights, of working silently while being dismissed, had not been wasted. They had been preparation. I straightened my spine, letting my presence fill the room without a word. The CEO's gaze swept over the table, taking in the family, then landing on me. She paused, measuring. And in that pause, the truth crystallized. Respect was not something my mother could command. It was something I had earned quietly, deliberately, in ways she had never noticed. The air was charged but still calm. I didn't speak first, I let her acknowledgement do the work. My mother's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. She had no script for this, no rehearsed response. I felt a slow, satisfying release, the kind that comes from finally seeing the ledger tilt in your favor. Years of being underestimated had distilled into this single, silent moment of vindication. No shouting, no theatrics. Just the recognition I had always deserved. I hadn't planned revenge the way people imagine it, with speeches or confrontations. I planned it the way I planned everything else, quietly with margins for error. Years earlier, when I realized approval would never come, I redirected my energy into competence. I built a reputation that spoke for me when I didn't. I specialized in restructuring failing divisions, numbers, contracts, people. I learned how to read balance sheets like body language, how to negotiate without raising my voice, how to make myself indispensable without being visible. Certifications came first, then boardroom access. I never announced promotions, I updated my resume and kept moving. The company my mother admired so loudly was one I advised discreetly. I wasn't an employee, I was the external solution they called when discretion mattered. The CEO didn't know my family. She only knew my work. Clean turnarounds, ethical compliance, profits without scandals. When she asked to meet during the holiday week, I didn't reschedule. I simply didn't explain. I wore a neutral coat, arrived separately, and let assumptions do what confrontation never could. Revenge didn't require exposure. It required alignment, timing, credibility, silence. By the time the doorbell rang, every variable was already in place. The door opened and she walked in, polished, composed, carrying authority like a second skin. My mother's eyes flicked toward her, scanning, evaluating. I stayed seated, hands folded, calm, letting the scene breathe. "Ma'am, I didn't know you were her daughter," the CEO said, voice soft but deliberate, the kind of acknowledgement that carries weight without raising decibels. My mother froze, knife poised mid-carve, her usual smug confidence gone. The room tilted in that silence. Everyone else blinked, unsure if they had missed something. I saw the subtle cracks form. My father's throat tightening, the cousin's nervous glance, my aunt's awkward clearing of her throat. My mother's lips pressed together, the corner of her smile trembling. She wanted a retort, a quick dismissal, but the words never came. Recognition had shifted allegiance silently, irrevocably. I remained still, letting her falter, letting her pride stumble. No one needed to know the years of quiet preparation, the careful moves behind the scenes. The payoff wasn't loud, it didn't require applause. The CEO leaned in slightly, a small nod, and I realized, vindication doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in measured, impeccable silence, and it lands harder than any insult ever could. The tension lingered long after the CEO left, like a faint echo in the room. My mother didn't speak for several minutes, her fork abandoned midair. When she finally muttered something about politeness, it was hollow, the words failing to mask the sting of recognition she hadn't earned. My father avoided my gaze entirely, as if admitting he had underestimated me all along was too heavy to carry aloud. Cousins and aunts whispered, glancing between us, uncertain how to behave. For the first time, I felt the subtle shift in the room's gravity, one I had orchestrated without raising my voice or creating a scene. My name now carried weight, previously invisible but undeniable. The stakes weren't just pride. They were the years of dismissal, the repeated questioning of my abilities, the unspoken message that I would never be enough. In that quiet moment, every slight, every microgesture that had built the ledger of my life seemed validated, balanced. For anyone who has been underestimated, overlooked, or silenced, this matters. It's proof that quiet, deliberate effort can turn invisibility into power, and that respect earned through competence can speak louder than years of shouting ever could. I sat back, calm, finally acknowledged, finally seen. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The satisfaction wasn't in proving my mother wrong. It was in finally seeing the truth reflected in the eyes of someone who mattered, someone impartial, someone who recognized my worth before she ever could. Years of patience, quiet work, and careful precision had distilled into that single silent moment. I felt lighter, unburdened, as if the invisible ledger I had carried for decades had finally been closed. My self-worth no longer depended on approval I would never earn at that table. It depended on the life I had quietly built, one decision, one achievement at a time. I could finally move forward with clarity, unshackled from the echoes of condescension. The future stretched before me, open and deliberate. Boardrooms, negotiations, opportunities. They would continue to unfold, and I would meet them on my own terms, with the same calm confidence I had cultivated in silence. Family dinners would no longer be trials but reminders of how far I had come. As the room settled into awkward murmurs, I allowed myself a small, private smile. Some victories don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, and when they do, the world can't ignore them. I had finally arrived.